Welcome everyone to the Human Libraries of Procurement. We call it Human Libraries of Procurement because it has the three most elements of things, like the human part of procurement, which is very important. The library part, because a lot of knowledgeable people are actually in procurement who impart their knowledge and help the juniors. So when I started off, I got a lot of training from the human libraries. And of course, we talk about procurement. So that's the concept of the show. And today we have one of such human libraries, SK Sanjeev Kumar Roy. Thank you, SK, for doing this. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you in the show. If you would start by introducing yourself and tell us a little bit of your journey as to how you did your career.
Sure. I'll be very quick on my first introduction, and then if you have any questions, we can jump into it. So my name is SK Roy. I'm based in Houston, Texas. I've called myself a global citizen because I've lived and traveled all around the world. I was born in India. I did my engineering in India from IIT. And then I moved to Singapore to do my MBA. I did my MBA from National University of Singapore, and then I joined ExxonMobil and then worked with them for a couple of years, and then went into management consulting with Ernst & Young. And then I got back into the oil industry in Chevron, initially to set up their procurement function, because at that time they didn't have a procurement function. So I was one of the so-called pioneers of the procurement in Chevron and worked with them for almost 2 decades. And then a couple of years ago, I decided to take it easy. So I've kind of gone into a semi-retirement where I'm choosing to do what I want to do rather than what the company wants me to do. So enjoyed the journey so far, moved around the world, worked on several expat assignments, lived in many countries, managed business, Chevron business in about 20 countries. And personal travel, both official and personal travel, been to about 45 countries. So really, that's why I say myself, I'm a global citizen. So that's my quick journey. Love procurement. And I would say that more than procurement, I love supply chain management, because procurement obviously is a very important subset of supply chain management. So I call myself more as an SCM professional with an expertise in procurement rather than just a procurement professional.
Right. So 45 countries. Wow, that's quite a bit of traveling. So that's nice.
Singapore passport helps me that way. So in that sense, that I can literally travel to almost any country that I want to without any visa. So
right. So nice. And again, just for the disclaimer part, whatever we discuss here is on personal levels and we are not representing any company as such.
Right.
So, and there is
thanks Supratim for reminding me, because when you are working, because obviously I've worked for Fortune 10 companies all my life, and when you're working for a large company, you have a lot of restrictions in terms of what you can say, cannot say.
Right.
I'm liberated from those restrictions, but yes, to your point, even on your side and my side, these are all personal opinions, so they're not representing any companies.
Sure.
I'll be careful to sensitize any information that I might be asked to share. So,
right. And just for the audience, there is a chat option in the audience section. If you have any questions, please put down your question there. Otherwise, I have a set of questions. So I'll go through those questions. And when I see any question, I would read it out to Sanjeev. Right. So Sanjeev, one of the best combinations in corporate world is the CPO-CEO combination. You are one of the rarest people who have this combination. You were a CPO, then you became a CEO. The other combination that I know is of Tim Cook of Apple. So what do you think about this? Do you think that this is a good combination, or how it helps for your career as well?
Sure. I'm a CEO of my own companies. I wouldn't call myself as a true CEO like Tim Cook and Mary Barra and so many others who have actually risen from either a chief procurement officer or a chief supply chain officer. And I think we did discuss this on one of the LinkedIn discussions, that procurement and supply chain actually gives you very easy access to the overall operations of a company. So if you are a procurement person or a supply chain person, you literally have access to the entire company's operations, all the way from procurement of raw materials to how the logistics is being managed to how the operations is being, and you can actually significantly influence those things as well, not just observe it like an auditor, but actually go ahead and influence those things all the way to the sales and logistics. So supply chain people really have, if you look at the SCORE model, the plan, buy, make, move, and sell. So they have actually got influence over all 5 elements of the company. So, other than maybe the marketing, again, you can influence the marketing aspects as well, but obviously you cannot drive them. But everything else, supply chain people can actually influence. So that's why I say that supply chain people, and supply chain is a new function. I mean, if you look at the evolution of supply chain, it's only been like a couple of decades when the word supply chain management was actually talked about. So it really takes, it integrates a lot of the functions that were previously standing on their own towers, and now you actually can helps collaborate and bring them together.
Right. But still going on with that CPO role, because it is very interesting. What would be the strategy, or what do you focus on a CPO role if you're just starting on a new organization for, let's say, 3 months and then 6 months? What would be your primary focus areas as a CPO?
Well, first of all, if you're an internally grown CPO, then you really start acting like a CPO many months or many years before you actually get appointed to the CPO role. So it has to be, so you have to build the credibility, you have to build the collaboration, and most importantly, the trust with the business. So the business should understand that they can trust you. And I think the reason why I'm also emphasizing on the trust is because procurement actually, and again, if you look at procurement, how did procurement come about in the last 50 or 70 years? It started off, it didn't have a very good beginning, right? It started off as a quote unquote purchasing organization, and purchasing organizations were created to, quote unquote, doubt the business, right? Like the business wants to go a certain way, and purchasing is saying, oh, I don't trust you. You have to bring everything to me because I don't trust any one of your people or any one of your team members. So bring everything to me. So procurement's starting was, I wouldn't say was a good starting, because it almost, you almost become not a friend, right? So it's not a very friendly environment. Now, the new procurement function obviously has to be collaborative, because if you really want to influence the changes, if you want to influence the specifications, if you want to influence the design of how things are being procured or how materials are being designed, because that's the value that's the real value that you bring, not just cutting purchase orders or getting contracts out, because those are very administrative value. Now, if you want to drive real value, you have to be very collaborative. You have to make the people trust that, yes, I really care about the operations, or I care about the logistics. And then when you start building the trust, then people will start opening things to you, start inviting you to your meetings, to start involving you early in the decision-making process, rather than, hey, I've already decided the supplier, can you just get a contract out for me? Because that's not procurement. That's, I would say, the most marginally value adding, or maybe in some cases, I would even go down to the point of saying is negative value adding, because then procurement is just seen as a rubber stamp, and that's not the value of procurement. So trust, building trust, understanding the business, understanding the people, being collaborative, not trying to flash the procurement or supply chain manual in front of them, because yes, there always will be a procurement manual for whatever purposes, but do not use this to your advantage, right?
Right. So that's the primary one. And then as
Yeah.
in you mature in your role, or your
Mhm.
your organization is maturing on, let's say, the purchase department or rather the procurement department, what other strategies would you incorporate? Like, how do you go about it? Trust is the most one. I think ease of business is also there. What else should we focus on?
So again, I mean, if you go back to the standard PPT model, PPT as in not the PowerPoint model, but the people, process, technology. So you have to focus on your people. Procurement still has a long way to go in terms of bringing in the right skill sets and the right, when I say people, not just the people, but the mindset of the people, the attitude of the people, right? So that you actually are bringing in people who are changing the face or the perception of the procurement. The second P stands for process,
Right.
trying to make the processes simple so that the person who deals with procurement walks out with a pleasant experience rather than, oh my goodness, I have to deal with procurement now, right? Because that is also a perception that procurement professionals or CPOs have to work hard on. And the last one, needless to say, will always be technology. I mean, technology is more of an enabler, not an end in itself. So you have to use technology to make things simpler, make things easy, and not use technology in a way to start creating barriers. So, I'm the type who says that, okay, you should build a technology where you're giving all the power to the business, and then the category managers are there to support you on making strategic decisions. But the tactical buying should be done by the business themselves with some form of a governance from procurement. I absolutely hate, and I do consult for a lot of companies right now as an advisor, and I hate the ones where procurement people have kind of built a bastion where every requisition has to go through procurement. Because if every requisition has to go through procurement, then all you end up doing is doing tactical work, because you will never have enough time to look at things from the 35,000 feet view, right? So procurement should try to, quote unquote, get themselves out of the tactical business, form a, and again, I'm not saying completely get out of it. You still need to have oversight of things, but have it in a meaningful way rather than a tactical administrative way, in which you are forcing people to talk to you only because the system or the process dictates, right?
Right.
So that's my PPT model.
Yeah.
I kind of evangelize. Yeah.
Right. I think fair point there that procurement started from the control mindset.
Yep.
And I think one of the thing, like you said, right, that quote or, everything has to go through procurement. I think another point, another good concept that is misunderstood by many is the 3-quote policy. I mean, you cannot have a 3-quote policy for everything, but people just use it like a, just a random term or, just a medicine for all cure kind of thing. Which is not,
it becomes a laughing joke in many cases when people are creating 3 quotations just to tick the box on something.
Right.
So,
yeah. The other one is the 300 question RFP that we roll out, and that too during the Christmas time.
Yeah, horrible. I'm not a big fan of it, because I always evangelize that a 1-page RFP is better than a meaningless 300-page RFP, right? And even the evaluation process, where you are calling in 20 people to evaluate a 300-page response from 10 different suppliers, the amount of time that is wasted in those things, you would rather use those time to actually create a better looking RFP that comes out in 1 page. I mean, you can literally write the specification for any service or product on a 1-page RFP, meaningful, rather than a complicated 20-page RFP that the supplier then has to spend. I'm actually even off the, and you probably might have seen some of my controversial posts, where I say that if you want to simplify your RFP, you actually have to start paying the suppliers for the time they spend on responding to your RFP, right? So, and that's the only way you can simplify things, right?
Yeah.
It's the most
well, I believe,
part of the RFP process.
Right. That I believe for interviews as well, that if you start paying the candidates, yeah, I think there would be a lot less rejections for starting at least, But yeah, I go back to your point where you said that you have traveled like 45 countries. Now, you have seen procurement for many countries as well. Do you see any cultural differences or anything different for different countries when it comes to procurement?
Well, couple of things that kind of stand apart. One is decision-making process. Some cases it's very decentralized, some cases it's very centralized. Some cases like the boss, whoever is the head of the company, he or she has to get involved in every tactical decision because there isn't that trust within the layers. So that is one thing where, and I've seen I've seen the extremes of it, extremes where I've seen delegations being given down to the working level, and I've seen decisions where, the big boss or the tauke or whatever the boss is called, has to sign off on every purchase order, every contract that goes out. I would say maturity-wise, procurement maturity, obviously some countries are more mature. They actually do get the essence of the strategic part of procurement versus some countries where they think procurement is still that rubber stamp that they have to go through, because if you don't go through it, audit will come and hound you. So we have to go to procurement because I don't want to face audit questions. And when that happens, then procurement does become a kiosk or a rubber stamp, but really doesn't add a lot of value other than, quote unquote, I passed the audit with flying colors, right?
Right. I think the audit point as well, right? When we talk a lot about savings, the values that procurement talks about is majorly savings. But even if we consider savings as a value add, if given a choice between audit and savings, I think most procurement people will tend to pick audit rather than savings, right? So that is another area which shows that the control is more important than anything else, which is not a good thing.
Sure. So two-point response to that, Supratim. So one is, I think you triggered, and we can actually have a 1-hour discussion on the concept of savings, because if you look at the definition of savings have evolved, and I would say that while it has evolved in more mature organization, some of the traditional organizations are still sticking to the very traditional definition of savings, which is like, hey, I purchased this for $10 now, you have to bring in at $8. If you're bringing in at $10 1 cent, there's no savings associated with it. And that drives some, and I can be very direct and honest, that drives some horrible behaviors where procurement is actually incentivized to buy things that may or may not necessarily meet what the business is looking for, because the business is trying to evolve, and here procurement is trying to buy the most horrible, most unacceptable things, and that's when you start breaking the trust. So I actually am not a big fan of the word savings, but I'm a big fan of the word value, right? And the word value sometimes, and sometimes my friends in finance struggle with the value, because according to them, if you purchase something for $10 and if you're bringing in something at $12, there's no value added, right? And I'm of the view that, hey, if I can prove to you through a mathematical model or through working with the engineer that this new chemical that I bought at $12 actually helps reduce my total cost of ownership or improves the revenue of the company, then I'm better off buying that product at $12 rather than the $10 last purchase price, right? So I'm of the view that procurement should actually, maybe for the few years, maybe completely stop counting savings and start focusing on value, because unless you break yourself from the mindset that I have to buy something cheaper than what I purchase, or have to buy the cheapest product in the market, You will never get that alignment with the business on what they're looking for, right? Because what you're looking for and what the business are looking for are completely dissociated. So I am actually super big fan of total cost of ownership modeling. And if you can actually show value on TCO, then you are delivering value. May or may not, maybe savings. I'm not saying that I'm completely ignoring savings, but you have to look at it from a TCO perspective. If the cheap product that you're buying is actually going to increase the total cost of ownership, then you can save $2, but if it's going to cost the company $20 more downstream, then sorry, procurement, you have just run my company, caused $18 loss to the company.
Right. So going further down a little bit more about TCO. I think total cost of ownership is the most misunderstood, one of the most misunderstood topics. There are certain things that you can do as TCO. There are certain things that you might not be doing it. But people applying it everywhere, again, is not the solution. Not applying it anywhere is also not the solution. What things can we keep in mind? Because I think TCO would gather a little bit more popularity over the period of time, but right now it is not the best thing as per the understanding of procurement people.
Sure.
Your views on it?
I think Supratim, you said it right. So TCO can be applied. So I would say that even the TCO models, they're hard TCO models where everything can be quantified in numbers, and then there are some not so hard TCO models. But philosophically, if you look at the philosophy, you can build a TCO model around everything, except that in some cases you'll have to make some soft assumptions, and in some cases it's easier to quantify those assumptions. But the principles around the TCO can be applied to everything. Now, having said that, I've also seen some not so diligent or not so prudent abuse of TCO, right? Where people are actually using the TCO model just to drive their favorite decision. And that's where I think the procurement professionals, as the neutral, objective parties, can help neutralize the subjectivity in some of those TCO modelings, right? Because if you ask your business to build a TCO model, they will always gravitate towards influencing a TCO model that favors their outcome. And when procurement people, when you're building it, or rather when procurement people are getting involved, because we are a neutral party, right? We don't have any interest. We do not know the vendors. We do not know. You can actually help make those TCO models more objective. Can you make it perfect? Probably not, but it is still better than the 300-page RFP that gets evaluated by 20 people who are all yawning their way through the evaluation process. Right? It's a lot more objective than that process.
Right. We have a question in the chat. Transformative procurement change is saying, in your view, how the perception of supply chain changed in the recent years, particularly due to the global disruptions like pandemic or geopolitical issues. So what changes have you seen in the perception of supply chain?
So first of all, I would say starting around 1980 or so, since the WTO changes were brought about, the concept of a global supply chain emerged, because prior to that, most of the supply chains were very local in nature and very plant-centric. So every plant was producing and the salespeople were basically selling it out from the plant, and the supply sources were mostly local in nature. So over the last few decades, I would say that the concept of global supply chain, where you can literally source your raw material from anywhere in the world and you can sell your finished goods to anywhere in the world, emerged. So that's where the value of supply chain emerged. I think it became more obvious, and supply chain has always been what I would call a behind the curtain organization where people were expecting you to deliver things on time, in full, and if you're only delivering it 99% of the time, then you would actually get questioned about or justify why 1% delay has occurred, because that's the kind of perception that people have, where people expect the supply chain organizations to be perfect all the time. So I think the global disruptions have also, so first of all, brought supply chain to the forefront, where people have actually now realized how important supply chain function is to the running of the company. Because if the supply chain, and I always keep using this old adage that your supply chain is as strong as your weakest link. So if you have a weak link in your supply chain, then that determines the strength of your supply chain. So it has brought supply chain to the forefront in terms of the importance. But it has also brought what I would call the planning aspect so in the past, supply chain planning was still being done on a very tactical basis, but now people have actually started kind of bringing supply chain people to the planning meetings to say, okay, so where should we now position our manufacturing places? Where should we buy our materials from? Because now they realize that there is a risk, there's an overall company risk that supply chain people need to get involved. So it's not just about the misdelivery or the, why did the truck not show up on time type of explanation, but hey, can you get involved in terms of getting involved in, should we buy this company or should we not buy this company? Supply chain people were never involved in M&A discussions, but have been involved in many discussions now around M&As, where supply chain people are actually one of the, what I would call not the drivers, but one of the fundamental influencers in, hey, should we buy this company or should we not buy this company? Yeah.
Right. I have a follow-up question from Alex, and this is a tricky one. He's saying, talking about global supply chain, we have a wind of change coming next Monday. So that's 20th, I think. How quickly do you see tariffs and counter tariffs being introduced? And how do you see this affecting the entire supply chain?
No, I think things. So, Alex, great question, Alex. I think the world is kind of waiting to see what those changes would be, and more importantly, how soon those changes will happen. So there will definitely be adjustments to, the plan, make, buy, make, move, and sell paradigm. But considering that obviously the tariffs will not be as disruptive as the pandemic supply chain disruptions were, I think it's just going to result in some some pricing disruptions. So obviously customers will see an immediate impact of the tariffs, but eventually it will lead to some resourcing or adjustments in terms of where people buy their products from. But especially on the direct supply chain, things don't change overnight, right? I mean, if you are already have an approval for buying a certain chemical or a certain product or a certain part from a certain manufacturer, you don't change your sources overnight. So it will probably take many months and quarters before people actually get to evaluating alternative sources of supply. And I'm sure that people have already started doing those scenario planning already, but the biggest unknown is who, where, and how much, right? So we don't know those data points. But again, on the direct supply chain, I would say that the changes in the supply sources won't happen overnight. On the indirect, maybe yes, because indirect supply chain are more fungible. But go ahead, Supratim.
Yeah, interesting times ahead. So some of those changes would be impactful. Some of them would be just passing. We'll see. One more follow-up question: what common misconception about supply chain management have you seen among other business functions, and how have you seen companies address them? So what kind of misconceptions have you seen in business functions, and what can we do to address them?
So I think the one misconception people have seen, and that's probably, I also sometimes refer to it as an occupational hazard of being in the supply chain function, where people think that we are magicians that will make things work 100% of the time, right? And forgetting that supply chain has got many, many moving parts, it's like a machine, and things can break down at any one point of time. And you cannot blame the supply chain manager for that. Hey, the truck did not show up on time, because there are 20 things that probably had to all line up for that truck to show up on time. So I would say it's an occupational hazard where people think that they're magicians and that we need to make things work 100% of the time. So it's part of, but then there's also the satisfaction that goes with it, because I've been a supply chain manager, and when you see things going well, and when you go to the plant, and when you actually get that recognition from the plant people or the sales people when things are going well, then you also feel very accomplished. So I would say, it's a give and take thing, right? And again, talking about the transformation part of my job, when you actually are able to influence changes, when you're actually able to influence changes in the way business has always performed, then you also feel accomplished, right? So believe me, as a supply chain person or even as a procurement person, I have influenced so many changes where the business had either been overlooking or completely looking the other way on so many changes. So, take sales as an example, right? Can procurement people influence sales decisions? And I would say yes, very strongly, because I have been part of many teams where I was actually able to prove to the salespeople that there were certain customers of theirs where the cost to serve, either from a procurement perspective or from the logistics perspective or from a TCO perspective, was so high that it did not make sense for them to sell the product to those particular customers. And salespeople initially wanted to throw me out of the building, right? But I kept my objectivity, and I kept my objective data fact-based discussion on, and said it does not make sense from a shareholder perspective for us to sell to those customers. So unless there is a strategic reason, and if there's a strategic reason, I will buy it. But you have to tell me that, is there a strategic reason why we have to sell it to those customers? Because it does not make sense. And they look at it, and there was a lot of tail customers that we were able to remove from our sales pipeline as a procurement professional or as a supply chain professional. So yes, we have been able to make or influence changes beyond just the contract or just getting the truck out of the terminal.
That's interesting. Sales actually listening to procurement. That's pretty interesting stuff.
And in fact, I would also say, since we're talking about sales, we actually had a very strong, what I would call partnership with sales, where we would actually get the salespeople and the procurement people to help each other, right? So for example, the salespeople, what were they doing 90% of their day, right? They were talking to procurement people in other companies, right? And they did not know, they need to know what goes on inside the mind of a procurement people. So we actually had a collaborative team where we would actually get the salespeople and the procurement people within our own company to talk to each other. And same thing when procurement people, they need to learn from sales a couple of things. And I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, right? The best tool that, and I even can tell you the person who actually is one of the founders, because he's actually one of my mentors. So Jimmy Ankelsaria from Ankelsaria Inc. He is one of the early founders of the zero-based pricing or the should-cost modeling, right? Salespeople, should-cost modelings come so naturally to salespeople. I was a salesperson, right? I knew that if I have to sell something, this is how I will build my product costing, right? This is how I build my product costing, raw materials, manufacturing costs, packaging costs, logistics costs, profit margin, distribution cost, distributor margin, whatever, right? So it came to me naturally, right? When I came to procurement, I was ahead of all my other procurement people because I came from a sales background. So with that understanding and experience, actually I get the sales people to teach should cost modeling to our procurement people, right? So like, hey, if you have to sell a service or if you have to sell a product to someone, how do you do your product costing? Now, once they tell you, then the procurement people say, oh yeah, now I can build my own should cost model, right?
Right. Yeah. We have another question, and this is also about, I think, the changes. So Fanny is asking, what do you think are the most significant challenges supply chain are likely to face in coming years, and how can business prepare to address them?
So, and this is probably going to be a little bit of a controversial response. I think
we'll edit it.
That's okay. That's okay. No, it's not a controversial response like what the L&T CEO gave. It's a response that probably needs to be taken in the right context, right? In the last 40 years or so, 45 years, you have seen globalization of supply chains, right? But in the last, I would say 5 to 10 years, from a politics perspective, it has also led to a lot of what I would call a right-wing nationalism policies being promulgated. And what might happen, and it's already happening to a large extent, is the deglobalization of supply chains, right? Where people are saying, no, offshoring is not the right thing. I need to do nearshoring. I cannot send this product out. Now people are starting to look at the content of where the raw materials are being made. So I would say that would be the biggest challenge that we all need to start preparing for, is the deglobalization of supply chains. And it might happen in some areas and might not happen in other areas, right? But you can see it's already happening, right?
All right. And I would say, hopefully, we would see a lot of more ESG initiatives that would come into supply chain. I think right now it's just a ticking the box kind of thing. It's just a greenwashing that is called, right? So I hope that it gets into the real initiatives that should be there.
I agree with G-Part, and I would also tell you, I'm actually speaking at one of the carbon tracking conferences next month. I was actually at one of the earlier conferences where one of the speakers, they were talking about scope 1, 2, 3 emission. And I said that, hey, how well does your company do on scope 3 emission reporting? And they say hard. And I said, and what do you think is if you look at your total emissions, what do you think is the contribution of the scope 3? It's the largest one, right? So yeah, to your point, there's a lot of greenwashing that is going on, but who in the company is the strongest influencer on the scope 3 emission, right? Because 90% of your scope 3 emission comes from your raw materials, right? And raw materials are the ones that will then eventually impact your outgoing products, which is the scope 3 downstream emissions. So who can actually influence that? Your procurement people, your direct procurement people. And even within the scope 3 emissions, I've seen people are running after the indirect suppliers and saying, hey, you're a services supplier, tell me how many people you have and how much commuting they're doing. We want to reduce the commuting part. But look at it from a scale perspective. I mean, scope 3 upstream, 80 to 90% of it is coming from raw materials, coming from the direct supply chain. And people are completely ignoring their direct suppliers and running after, let's reduce our travel or let's reduce our commute and, maybe, impacted by 0.001%. But that's not where the net zero emissions, that's now how you can achieve net zero, right?
Right. I also wanted to talk about your company, Greynomics, and it says it is the gamification of the supply chain. So anything about gamification and how it influences supply chain?
I think I might have shared this with you or on some LinkedIn posts. So the Greynomics is really my own way of keeping myself two parts. One is intellectually occupied, and second is giving back some wisdom back to the function, supply chain function, right? So I personally and very strongly believe that the current learning and development, training, leadership development in procurement supply chain is very tactical, right? You are taking computer-based training courses, you are learning through a PowerPoint or listening to maybe a 1-hour lecture here and there. And that is not where the focus should be, because a lot of the behaviors, the supply chain leadership behaviors, needs to be changed. And I'm actually of a very strong opinion that unless you start simulating what happens in your workplace, right? Because there's no point in me sending a buyer to a 6-hour training course where he or she is being asked to say, how do you take a requisition and how do you convert it into a purchase order, right? Because that's tactical, that's technical training. That does not change the person's behavior at all, right? So I'm of the view that unless you put that buyer into a simulated environment where he or she is now being asked to respond to real world problems and then see the impact of their decisions or the actions that they're taking in the real world or in the simulated environment on the impact, that's how learning happens, right? I mean, since you grew up in India, you probably have played cricket, right? Can you learn, how much cricket can you learn by reading books, right? Or watching cricket, unless you are there on the ground, unless you start playing things. So the Greynomics is really my way. So I actually build simulation games. And since we were talking about net carbon emission reduction, so one of the games that I'm currently just about to launch is called Net Zero. It's called Net Zero with the purpose that you actually, it's a multiplayer game meaning that you actually bring in a procurement person, a sales person, a technology person, an operations person, a finance person. You give each one of them different tasks, right? And give them different challenges. But one person's action is actually having an impact on someone else's input, right? And you simulate it, and then you actually constantly show them on a real-time basis that every action that they are taking is actually having an impact on someone else's input or decision. And you simulate it, and the net zero is really the challenge to the team is, how do I grow my company and reduce my carbon emission at the same time, right? So that's the challenge that this team has. So Greynomics is really my way of keeping myself occupied and also giving back to, with no intention of making any money, because all my games that I build, I give it to my friends and my whoever asked for it free of cost. Because the idea here is that, hey, if 10 people learned the game, played the game, learned something through it, the accomplishment that you get from it is far more than whatever license that they might pay for that. So that's Greynomics. And yes, to your point, what can gamification be applied to? It can be applied to literally anything, right? I mean, you can apply gamification to learning negotiations, because there's only so much negotiation skills that you can learn by looking at the 20 best practices in negotiations, unless you push people into saying, hey, you're a seller, you're a buyer, and now you actually have to play a real game with numbers, and it's actually tracking and giving you feedback on how well you're doing. You can apply it to anything and everything, actually.
Right. I think we could have continued with the gamification of negotiation. I think it's a very big topic in itself. Plus RFXs as well. That is another.
Oh, yeah. In fact, one of the other games that I'm contemplating building is building an RFX, not the evaluation part, but the biggest value in RFX is the creation of the specification, the creation of the RFP, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Right.
where the biggest value is lost, because all people do with RFXs is copy last year's event and send it out to the supplier. And you've really literally not added any value, but depleted a lot of value if you're just doing a cut and paste of specifications, right? Yeah.
Right. I'll take another question from the chat. Transformative Procurement says, with greater focus on sustainability today from the government, consumer, investors, etc., how are you seeing CEOs looking at sustainable supply chain?
So I've seen a couple of trends. So I was consulting for one of the downstream petrochemical companies, and I have seen that, and the demand is actually coming not so much from the supply chain or the company driving it, but it's actually coming from the customers, right? So this customer was supplying to, a leading consumer brand, cosmetic company, and the cosmetic company now actually wants to have certain percentage of their product as coming from biofeedstock, as an example, right? So the cosmetic company kind of drove that, because they actually had to claim on their selling product that, hey, X percentage of our, or X percentage, I'm not getting into the numbers, X percentage of our thing is made from renewable feedstock. And that kind of put the pressure on the supplier, and eventually they actually had to change their feedstock from where they used to buy to bio renewable feedstocks. So yeah, I've seen significant changes happening on the direct supply chain, and most of the thing either comes from government mandates, but mostly coming from consumers, right? So for example, we have already seen a lot of, you open your Coca-Cola bottle and you will see that, Coca-Cola Coke bottle says that, it's made from X percentage recycled material. Now that puts pressure on the backward supply chain to make sure that, the supply chain now has to adapt to the commitments that have been made to the consumers or the customers.
Right. We have two statements from Fanny. I think these are not questions, but more statements. Building a strong internal brand for procurement or supply chain is crucial for organizational success, as you rightly said. Negative perception can obstruct the value creation and stakeholder buy-in. And she also says that this is particularly true for B2C business. So
I think
if there is a fresher who is thinking about procurement career, what would you say to him?
Sure. So by the way, I did not land in procurement. I landed in supply chain management. And from within supply chain management, I chose procurement because I saw that procurement was actually, I had a lot of influence and a lot of ability to transform things beyond their own scope of work. But coming back to your question, Supratim, on what advice would I give? So first of all, the first advice that I would give is become a business analyst, right? Become a business analyst, because as a business analyst, and try to reach out to as many mentors as you can. As a business analyst, you are generally given a lot of go for jobs, like, hey, go and analyze this, go and analyze this. And your task on a Monday and a Friday might be completely different, but there's so much learning that you can do as a business analyst, because once you get into a proper job, your job becomes very well defined, right? As a business analyst, you can literally be given any problem in the world. And that way, there's a lot of learning that you can do. So first 2 years, 2 to 3 years, I would say, and don't take the business analyst role as anything less important, or, oh, I only want to start at a category manager role. You have to be a business analyst. And I also use, and people who have worked for me will probably know the DIKW pyramid that I always evangelize. So the DIKW pyramid, the data, information, knowledge, wisdom pyramid, is a very old concept, maybe even 100 years old, where it says that data sits at the bottom of the pyramid. From data, you actually extract information, and from information, you extract knowledge, and from knowledge comes wisdom, right? So that DIKW. So I always tell analysts that, hey, if your boss is asking you to, hey, go and download this data, I said, if you just download the data and give it to him in a spreadsheet, you have just done the D part, right? Because all you have done is he or she did not have access to SAP or in a particular cloud tool. So all you have done is, you have either copied from one database or two databases, and you have just smashed things together and given the spreadsheet to your boss. That's D, and that's not what he or she is expecting from you. What he or she is expecting from you is, what is the data telling me, right? Which is the information. Now, from that information, and again, if you do it a couple of times, you will get very easily that, hey, what knowledge can I derive from the information? And then what wisdom can I actually extract from that knowledge? And I said, as a business analyst, try to move up the pyramid. Try to do, obviously it will not come naturally to you on day one, because on day one, you might just be busy 100% of your time just extracting the data, but try to move up the DIKW pyramid. And once you move up the DIKW pyramid, people will start seeing a future category manager. People will start seeing a future leader in you, because they will see that, hey, this guy is not just a data guy. He or she thinks about what does the data mean. Or even when your boss asks you to say, hey, can you extract this data? Ask them a very simple question. What do you need the data for, right? Because unless you ask the question, how do you know what you need to look for, right? And they will actually appreciate. I mean, maybe 1 out of 100 might get turned off, like, hey, why are you asking me the question? But 99% of the managers will actually appreciate you asking that question. What do you need the data for? What problem are you trying to solve, right? Because when they actually you're actually getting into their mind, right? If you actually ask them that question. So that's my advice to procurement people. Become a business analyst, spend the first 2-3 years, and if you have to work, more hours than the 40 hours that you have to do, that's fine. Again, don't burn yourself. But those, again, I'm not going down to the extent of whatever the other person said, but I'm saying work hard, right? Because this is the time this is the investment that you're making that will help you grow your own internal thinking and actually make a future leader in you.
Right. Yeah, it starts with problem solving. That's exactly. Even I say that every time. That what is the problem that you're solving? Be it stakeholder, be it your boss, be it everybody else. One last question, and I say procurement, but I would rather imply it to supply chain. What changes? We have talked about it in the chat as well. But what changes in relevance to, let's say, AI? AI is a big thing. In terms of AI, what changes do you see in the future of procurement or supply chain in recent, at least 1 or 2 years?
So I would say two things. One is the fact that, tools like ChatGPT and others are available to us. And there are many competitors. I'm not just focusing on one, although I like ChatGPT because I'm one of those plus customers. So I use it like 100 times a day, because if I use the unpaid version, it kind of says, okay, your quota is finished. So I had to go for the paid version. So it actually helps. So it's the DIKW pyramid, right? It actually tries to put me in that K knowledge and wisdom pyramid all the time, and doesn't. I don't have to spend a lot of time on the D and I part. So even as a procurement professional, there's a lot of wisdom that you can actually extract from the AI tools that you might take a few hours, you might actually have to talk to 20 people, and now the AI tool can actually help you do that. So I would encourage people to, and everyone who has worked for me knows that I've actually encouraged them to start using OpenAI. I was actually OpenAI customer within the first day or two of its opening. And since then, I've been telling everyone, okay, if you're not an OpenAI consumer, or if you're not an OpenAI customer, you're losing out something in your life. Number one. Number two is, I think, the rise of what they're known as agentic AIs. And again, I might say something controversial, but if you look at the user interface of ERP systems are the source of truth in any company, right? That's where all your finance information, that's all your vendor information, that's where all your cost center, budget information, they all reside in ERPs. And if ERPs had a good user interface, then no procure tech would ever be needed, right? Because at the end of the day, whatever procure tech that you're using is to interact with the source of truth, which is, but ERPs suck. And sorry, all the ERPs, they all suck when it comes to user interface or user experience. That's why procure techs came in, Aribas, the Coupas, the GPs of the world. They came in because they actually were more intuitive. They needed less training. You had to remember less number of screens, and you have to be less of a geek to address them. But eventually, if you look at those solutions, they're also solving only certain problems, right? Oh, I can create a contract very easily, or I can create a requisition very easily. But as a procurement professional, there are about 50 more problems that you have to solve other than the problem of creating a contract or creating a requisition or a purchase order. So agentic AIs will probably emerge, and they might actually, to some extent, and not forecasting this, but they might even replace or become the procure techs, right? So eventually, if you look at, and Coupas and Aribas and GPs, they already know that. So they've already started building a lot of the AI capabilities into their tools, because they know that eventually is the AI agent interface that the customer wants, not the the dumb screen or the fixed screen that that we have trained them on. So eventually you will see agentic AIs evolve, and it just means that you'll be talking to a person, and you might not even be talking. Maybe the business is actually talking to the agentic AI, getting the procurement work done, and all you are doing as a procurement professional is training or providing enough guidance and support to the agentic AI in terms of, hey, if the person is looking to buy a bearing, then divert them, because this is our preferred bearing supplier, right? But before we go, I would say that as a procurement professional, try to improve your percentage allocation on the category management process. And again, the principles, the philosophy of category management. Again, if you're doing category management process in a very bookish manner, where you're saying, oh, no, I have to create this slide, I have to create this slide, I think you have lost the philosophy of the spirit of the category management. So focus on the strategic aspect of category management and try to automate and try to simplify the operations, because the more you simplify the operations, the more the business will come to you, because you will have time to actually talk to them on the strategic aspect. Otherwise, you will be busy 99% of the time solving administrative issues. Oh, why is this purchase order not issued? Why is this contract still stuck in approval, right?
So I think we'll keep those for the next one.
Yeah, we can definitely get another call. As I said, I'm a semi-retired guy, and whoever comes to me for whatever advice, I give it to them, and that's how I'm keeping myself busy.
That's how I end most of my shows, that with the promise that we'll have a second round very soon. And this has been special because this has been the two Roy talking to each other. So as I said, this has never happened before. The two Roys on one podcast. And as you said, this was a royal show it's a huge learning for me. I hope
Me too.
those who are logged in or those who are listening to this afterwards, the recording would be posted on YouTube. I hope that it is a learning for them. And any questions, let us know. Otherwise, thank you, Sanjeev, so much for your time. Great session, great insights. Thank you again.
Yeah, it's an honor for me too. Thank you, Supratim, for inviting me. Okay. Bye.
Have a nice day.